You might already know this, but I handpick guests on this show. It's really important to me that I've had an experience of someone before I share them with you. My guest today is someone I met this year. Michelle Jones is the president and co-founder of Trauma Integration. She's an educator and certified trauma integration coach. She loves truly connecting with people, and she firmly believes in the inherent resiliency within each of us and loves uncovering the light and strength in the people she meets. Michelle and I actually met through a colleague of hers who is a trauma therapist too. And her colleague and I worked with a client at the same time. And the client experienced really incredible results while we addressed different angles of the trauma and helped the client build new mindsets and habits to move forward in his life. Our client introduced us, and that is how I met Michelle. This is a very genuine conversation, and Michelle generously shares her own journey, her healing from the trauma in her life, and how it has informed the work she does today. She takes us into how shedding emotional weight in her life has freed up the way she lives, parents, and creates harmonious relationships, and how ultimately creating life differently for her has been setting down who she thought others expected her to be and courageously stepping into who she was made to be. Get ready for a spark of hope and inspiration. Meet Michelle. I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently, a podcast where we explore the ins and outs of what becomes possible when we're willing to think, do, and show up differently to the moments of our everyday lives. Good morning, Michelle. Welcome to Differently. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Carla, thank you so much for having me on. I love every chance I get to connect with you.
I'm so grateful. Like I was just telling you before we hit record that our paths have crossed. And I would love for you to start with really just sharing your personal story, like what, and we'll get into what you do, but what led you to doing the work that you do today?
Okay, so I think it's interesting that it's been such a silly course. When we're 18 years old, we kind of think we know how life is going to flow out before us, and it turns out that that is not at all what my experience has been. And the more I actually get to know people, I think that's a pretty common experience, right? So
True.
If we were to travel back to that 18-year-old, I went to nursing school, studied and became a pediatric nurse. And I did that for about 15 years in hospital, loved it, like absolutely loved engaging with the kids, showing up and feeling like I made a difference. And ended up coming home from that work because I had a couple of kids with special needs, and I was lucky enough to be able to be home with them full time during that time when they really needed for me to be there. During that time, I picked up a few like kind of quirky things, but now they all come together, right? Hindsight's 2020 and seeing how it comes together. So I did work as a photographer, which I loved. It helped me to see the beauty in my everyday life, which being home every day with special needs kids felt a little challenging. And then also the piece of the puzzle that really brought me to where I am today. So taking that insight, some of my kids needed some resources in the mental health community. And I was kind of astonished after working in a hospital setting and how smooth and relatively easy it is to get solutions to these physical medical problems, how challenging it was to find great resources and help for my kids who needed mental health support. And so that really surprised me. And it really took quite a wrestle to get there. And I feel like I kind of had a leg up because I knew how to navigate this, medical community, and still I found it a challenge. So if we fast forward a little bit, after kind of working through that, I ended up kind of becoming my own expert at some of these things, as a lot of moms with special needs kids do, right? And so through that process, I wanted to step into the next part of my professional life, really trying to make a difference in this mental health arena. And I did not know that it would bring me to this work, but I knew that that was what I wanted to do. And as I began connecting, I ended up connecting with a bit of an internship with someone who taught me how to do this process of trauma release. And of course, one of the first things that he told me was, well, before you can do this work with others, you have to clear your own trauma. Like you have to do your own processing of your trauma. And I very glibly was like, well, that makes sense. Sure, I'll do that. And ended up realizing that I had really disconnected from a lot of traumatic experiences that were affecting me a lot real time. And I just hadn't made the connection. I hadn't made the connection that the challenges and struggles that I had, whether it be like restlessness and anxiety or a difficult time resting or having really like out of proportion responses during some parts of my life, that those things were connected to this unprocessed trauma that I had internally. If I had known that, I think I would have been really motivated to take care of it earlier. I just didn't understand that that's what was going on. I really had just put all of that in the category of, well, that's just the way I am. That's just who I am. I just have all of these things and I just have to like carry all this around with me, and I'm just going to make the best of it and go be productive and successful in the rest of my life. And so that was a revolutionary experience for me to go through, to process this unprocessed trauma. And through that process, you know, I'm kind of a super nerd, so I wanted to understand it. I wanted to understand why is my body holding it like this? How does this work? How does the brain work with this? And what makes this process effective and long lasting in terms of the relief that I found from it. And so that brought me to the work that I do today. Today, I kind of split my time 50-50. I work half as a trauma educator. So I help people understand their trauma response, because that was what I longed for the most when I was in the middle of the process. So it became like a passion of mine that everybody could have hope and have the opportunity to understand what they were experiencing. And I also prepare coaches to be able to help clients process trauma, or therapists. I actually have a couple of therapists that I've trained as well that use this in their practice. And then I also do some one-on-one coaching myself, working with clients. So I kind of split my time between those two things.
So take us back, like how do you define trauma?
Okay, so there's two different ways people think of trauma, right? One of the things is we can think of trauma as the event that happened, the crisis, the circumstance that we experienced. And that's a perfectly fine definition, but the one that is the most useful to think about is that trauma is actually what happens within us internally when we are in these crisis situations or in maybe a dysfunctional family pattern, right? And so I think that's helpful to differentiate between the two, because here where I sit in 2021, if I were to look back, I really can't do anything to change the literal events that have happened. They're in the past, they're finished, it's done. However, what I can do is go to and recognize the trauma response that I was carrying within, or that a client is carrying within, and that we can actually make some real change with.
And so that real change that you're helping people access, is that in your physical body?
Yes. So part of what it is in the moment of a crisis or in the moment of a traumatic event, our brain goes into shock. Our brain switches the way that it's processing. It's creating a memory in a totally different way than it would in any other time of our life. And so as we're in this moment, we're in shock. What happens is we're taking in all this information into our body. I like to think of it that our body is taking in as much information as possible so it can make like microsecond decisions on how to survive the moment. the brain's just prioritizing survival. It doesn't really care if it's embarrassing or awkward or how hard it will be to unpack later. Our brain is focused in that moment on getting through the moment and surviving, making it through the experience. And so when we are taking in all this information, our frontal lobe, which is like all of our executive functioning, grown up, analyzing, decision making part, that part's not really online because the body's focusing on survival. So we're taking in a lot of information. There's a lot of emotion. We're experiencing a lot of physical sensations in the moment. And the thoughts and beliefs that we form in that moment are likely kind of fragmented and they may not make a lot of sense. And that's just the nature of how we're processing this memory, right? And so when the moment is past and now we're stepping back into like regular life, because now that time is over, we're not there anymore. We have this memory within us, this unprocessed trauma that contains all these physical sensations, emotions, thoughts, and beliefs. And it really stays there until it gets processed, until the brain can understand it and know what to do with it. And so part of the work that we do is we go in a really mindful way. The whole process is very client driven. It's a process of being willing to be in the present moment with all these pieces of the puzzle, with the physical sensations, the emotions, and the thoughts from that event, right, from that time. And we go to all of these pieces and we help the brain to understand what was experienced, what was happening, and that this event is no longer happening. So I no longer need to keep carrying all of these physical and emotional responses with me because the danger is over.
It's so fascinating. And I'm like, the more you and I talk, the more I'm understanding like why our work is so complementary. Because like when I work with clients, we're going back to those events, like those that we all carry these stories or events in our life that are still impacting us today. And you're doing that part of the work. And when I'm working with somebody, I'm helping them see how they're living today as if they were 7 in that environment, that trauma that occurred at that time. They're behaving today in their life with their boss, with their spouse, whatever it is, as if they're still surviving that moment that you're talking about. And so you're addressing it from the point you just described. And what I'm helping them do is unpack what they made that event mean about them and how they see the world and how they see themselves and how they see others. And it frees them on another level because a lot of times as adults, we're creating pain in our life today from something that happened years ago just with our minds. We're recreating that pain over and over and over again. And I'm just finding it fascinating as we talk, the more I can see how the work we're doing really like aligns really beautifully together.
Absolutely. I really love that like perspective on it because I think it's so true. And it's interesting because I think part of what is confusing for people is that sometimes, so I'll just, I'm 43 years old. And sometimes back when I was processing my trauma, I'm trying to remember, I was 38. So sometimes I was acting as 38-year-old Michelle, right? Like capable, confident, successful adult, making adult decisions. And sometimes I would get kind of nudged or develop a pattern in a relationship where all of a sudden I was behaving like I was 10 or 11 years old. And I didn't recognize that. I just thought that was part of my personality. I just thought that was kind of part of who I was. And it didn't even occur to me that that wasn't the same. And people experience that too, not only with their thoughts and beliefs, but also with their emotions and their physical responses as well. And so sometimes if someone is having say, a panic attack. I'm not saying all panic is related to trauma, but it's not uncommon for it to be related to trauma. It's helpful to recognize that, okay, all of this intense sensation that I'm having in my body, this isn't 20, 21-year-old me who is feeling all of this intensity, and it's not my body right now that senses danger. It's me connecting to this younger part of me that felt in danger at that moment. And just even understanding that piece can kind of diffuse a lot of the intensity, because all of a sudden we recognize that we are safe in this moment. We are okay. Our body isn't freaking out. Our body's just remembering how it felt in this earlier time. But without that understanding, it feels like right now in this moment, my body isn't functioning, which just increases our fear and increases that kind of cycle, right?
Yeah. And then you can't show up as your best self or who you want to be in that particular moment. Like I'm remembering working with somebody years and years ago. She would go in to meet with her boss and she would kind of turn into that little girl every time. And as we worked together, we unpacked that, she had a relationship with her father that was, he was very like an interrogator and would question her. And she would constantly feel like she had to defend and prove and measure up or wasn't measuring up. And every time she sat in her boss's office and he would start asking her questions, she would turn into this, like having to prove and defend and like get very emotional, and it would stir her up and impact the rest of her day. She would feel terrible because she wouldn't end up behaving the way she wanted to be as a leader in the organization.
Yeah.
And as soon as I tried to, like, we talked about that your boss is just doing his job. He's just asking questions, right? That it didn't have to mean all the things she was making it mean.
Yes.
And that when she released herself of the job of having to defend or prove anything and see that situation entirely different, she could start showing up in her self today, right? Her brightest and best self, and start behaving and responding in a way that didn't trigger all the old emotion. And I think I can relate to that in my own life, and I see it over and over again. And I'm sure you do too in the work you do with clients.
Yeah, and then it makes me wonder if you also see, because as I'm listening to that story and connecting with that, I realize, part of what we're feeling is that there's a part of us that knows that how we're responding isn't authentic to who we are today. And that feels terrible. It feels terrible when we're in that space, right? And then it kind of makes me think too, one of the things we do is not only do we make meaning out of things that aren't there, right? We add meaning to the situation that is just of our own making. But I think sometimes we think we're better at reading people's minds than we really are. And I know now for a fact I'm a terrible mind reader. It turns out I actually don't know what someone else's thoughts or intentions are unless I ask them. But I think as a whole, unless we're really conscientious of that, we walk around thinking that we understand and know people's meaning. So with this client and she's sitting with her boss, she might be thinking, oh, he thinks I'm doing a terrible job. He thinks, all this meaning, and a lot of it has to do with her thinking she knows his intentions and his thoughts, when the truth is we really can't know that about somebody else. So we either develop this pattern of assuming that everyone is judging us and critical of ourselves, which is usually because we are judging ourselves and critical of ourselves, or that maybe there's literally nothing more to this than they're just asking me a question.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I got that in my own life, somebody told me, or I can't remember where exactly it came from, but this idea that I didn't have to think for others anymore because for half of my life I was thinking what other people were thinking and then adjusting and contorting myself and my behavior to what I thought they wanted. And you're right. I mean, my husband and I now, when that happens, when I think I know what he's thinking, I will say it out loud. And usually 90% of the time or more, he's like, no, that's not at all what I meant, or that's not at all what I was thinking.
Totally.
And so firing yourself from that job of thinking for others was one of the most freeing things in my life. Like just
Isn't it true?
releasing. Oh, it's
I
exhausting.
remember I remember watching, I think it was a Netflix special with Brene Brown, and she phrased it as the story I'm telling myself is. And so now I'll use that phrase with my spouse or a kid, like, the story I'm telling myself is that you're annoyed that I never cooked dinner tonight. And he's like, I haven't even thought about it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yes.
But I could have spent all this energy. And in the past, I would have continued to kind of carry around maybe guilt, but then also resentment, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm so fresh, like, man, I feel bad. I should have prepared a meal and now he's upset. And then I may even talk myself into being resentful that he's upset because why is that my job to cook dinner? And the whole time he's not thinking about it at all.
Right? I used to spin out for a whole day or a week on stuff like that. Like it's really crazy making what happens in our head and the freedom that's available when you start to let some of that go. So good. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I actually find that it's super connected to one of the things I've noticed professionally, but even with my friendships and my family relationships, is that when I'm starting to feel stressed or overwhelmed, it's oftentimes because I'm taking on responsibility for something that's not mine to carry. I feel like I need to fix something that's not mine, or I'm carrying something that actually belongs to somebody else, right? And I feel like that's so connected to what we're talking about here in
Mm.
terms of carrying what other people want from us when we don't even actually know what they want from us. It's just, and all of it in both cases is just something that we have voluntarily picked up to carry. And I love how you said I fired myself from that. Like, yes, I just think of it as I like literally picture in my head, like grabbing it up and being like, actually, this isn't mine to carry. And it like picture in my mind handing it back to that
I
person.
love
Like, this
that.
actually isn't mine to carry. And it's remarkable how, within minutes, I feel like centered again and I'm not carrying this kind of frantic overwhelm feeling because I think our bodies are designed to be able to carry the things that are ours. I think when we begin to feel stress and overwhelm, it's probably because we're carrying things that aren't ours and we
Mhm.
weren't built to do that.
It's so true. There's a concept that I use inside of coaching it called your domain of responsibility. And it came from this idea after coaching a lot of years. I started to notice that, especially as women, we've got our arms in all kinds of things that are
Mm,
not ours to manage, like an octopus with like our arms just all over the
yes.
place with the best intentions and coming from a place of love and wanting to help and like all of that. But it's exhausting us and costing so much in our lives and even in our relationships. Like for me, I was always worried about everybody else. I was trying to help everybody else, trying to manage their lives. And like, they don't want me doing that. And nor do I want anybody doing that to me. And I started to see it as a gift, actually, to see people as capable of
Mm,
handling what they have on their plate. And if I feel a need to help, instead of just assuming that they need my help, asking, like, do you need help? Or even when somebody starts to just unload on you and you feel this need to fix or change it, asking, like, how can I support you? Or what do you need? Is there anything that you need? Because that right there just saves so much energy and time. And so, this idea of like pulling our arms back into our domain of responsibility is another place we can like release some of the heavy and maybe some of the trauma actually creates some of those behaviors, right? Where we learn to get love or be seen or be respected by doing things. Do you think that's true?
totally. Or even just as simple as to stay safe, right? That
Yeah.
if we want to stay safe, then we need to do our best to keep everything like flowing smoothly, not rock the boat, stay with what we
Oh,
need to do. And as you were sharing that example, I could just feel myself kind of relax and I could see myself in the first part. Like I'm like a recovering control freak, right? Like I used to really operate in that way where I would try to manage things because it helped me to feel like I had some control, which is all an illusion, but it made me feel safe. And all of that was
Mm.
compensating for the fact that I really didn't feel safe internally. And so I was trying to just create safety by like controlling what was going on. And yes, it came from a loving place, but more fundamentally, really, I didn't feel settled within myself. Now that I feel really like safe and secure and content within myself, I also notice I feel that drive to do that much less anyway. And I'm so thankful. Like on the one hand, I wish I'd learned this like 20 years ago, right? But things happen for a reason when they do. And one of the things I'm thankful for, my two oldest kids were like mid teenagers when I went through my trauma work, and now they're college students. So they're making this transition into adulthood. And the last thing that a 19-year-old college student wants is their mom coming in to try to run the show for them, right? All under the illusion of like, I'm helping you. No, our kids want for us to like have confidence in them, right? And so now when there's a catastrophe of whatever size it is, according to my college student, the first thing I say is like I'll acknowledge like, man, that's so frustrating, or that's unfair that that came up, or whatever it is. And then the next thing I'll always say, which I love how you said, I acknowledge their strength and capability.
Mm.
Like I absolutely know that you have what it takes to get through this and to figure it out. If there's anything that you'd like for me to do to help support you through that, let me know. So I
Mm.
give the ball back to them, right? Like I know you've got this, even though you're still kind of a baby because you're, 18, 19, 20 years old. I have confidence in you. I know you have got this, but I'm here to help you and support you. You let me know what's helpful. And it has really totally changed my relationship with them in that they now come to me when they have questions or they need counsel on something because they know that I'm not going to come in and try to control it and run the show. And so it's become this really beautiful relationship. And I think if a recovering control freak can learn to do that with our kids, which as a mom, I think that's where we have the hardest time, like stepping back and not carrying it. It goes to show that we can do that with any relationship, really.
Mm. That is so beautiful. And it's a practice, right? Like as you were sharing that, I have a 19-year-old who's in the Navy, went into the Navy in September of last year, and we got to see him this year. And I remember we were out in the ocean just talking, and I said something to him. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it came from a place of like worry and fear that he wasn't okay or doing okay. And he just looked at me and he's like, he was kind of joking, but like, is that how you see me? Is what he said. And like, it brings tears to my eyes right now because he wanted me to see him as capable and strong, but that moment of him reminding me to see him as capable and strong was really pivotal for me. And it's such a good reminder to just, our kids do want that. And especially boys, I think they want that respect and they want to be seen as capable and strong and so beautiful.
Yeah. I love that. And I have to think all of our relationships benefit from that, right? Like all of our relationships that can balance into a healthy, give and take relationship. I think all of our relationships benefit from that. Like nobody wants to be made to feel like they're not capable and that you have to come in and save them. Like everybody wants love and support, but nobody wants to be made to feel like they're not capable of managing their life. You know what I mean?
Yes,
I mean, maybe there's
completely.
some people that have really dysfunctional patterns, but overall, like I just think of how I would respond, even if I was having a crisis in my life in this exact moment, I would feel so much more supported and encouraged if somebody came to me and were like, Michelle, you are so capable and I know you've got this, but I want for you to know I have your back and this is how I'm helping. Like that would feel so much different than like, I know that you don't have this, so I'm coming.
Or even just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is so terrible. And just like, too much empathy too doesn't feel amazing, right?
Right. because then it makes it feel almost more overwhelming. Like, wow, if you're freaking out about it, it really must be
And I
something
really
that I
bet,
can't climb
yes.
back out of, right?
Yes, for
Absolutely.
sure. So, couple things. One is I saw on your website or in your bio or something I read about you, like just your passion to like really help people see their own resiliency and the light inside of themselves. So I would love to just hear a little bit more about that.
Well, part of it, I would say that's my favorite part. I would say hope is one of my favorite words, and this concept is one of my absolutely favorite parts of the work that I do. And it transcends both the education piece and the coaching work that I do with people. I think one thing that I've come to learn and understand, the more I participate in this work, is that I truly believe fundamentally every human um, is resilient and capable and full of light and has strength given the right access to support and resources, right? Like, obviously, we need to have that component. What happens is we get all this stuff in the way. We may have some debris or some beliefs, like you said, or some experiences that kind of cloud people's ability to see it about themselves. Those core truths don't change about us. Even if we can't see it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Or even if we've forgotten how to connect to our resiliency or our light or our strength, it's still there within every single one of us. And it's a fundamental underlying belief, and it drives all the work that I do. Because everybody that I meet with, I start with that assumption that all of the healing comes from within them. They already have everything they need to heal. I am not the person who heals them. Healing doesn't come from me. They have that within themselves. All of that insight that they need, it will all come. I kind of see it as my job to help them clear away the debris so that they can connect to their own strength and resiliency. And so as they do that, now they've really anchored themselves in, because I don't want them to be anchored to me. Like, I'm awesome and I like enjoy all the people I connect with, but I'm not with them 24 hours a day, but they are. And so I need for them to like connect to and like believe in and recognize and learn the language of how to connect to all of those core attributes that are within them.
We do share some of the same fabric. I can't believe what you just said, because I often say in the work I do that I'm not the expert on your life. Like, you are the expert on your life. And like you said, you have everything you need and can access to lead your life. I'm the expert on helping you clear all the crap. This is what I say, all the crap that's in the way of you seeing that and accessing that and believing that. And so that was crazy that you said that. I've never heard anybody else say that. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird. That's exactly how I
Right?
feel inside of the work. Yeah, because it is there. And I start with that point too. Like, I feel like that's like a gift that you and I probably have, is seeing people beyond where they are. Like, I can already see them beyond all the debris, and I just hold on to that and help them clear away all the stuff that's in the way of them seeing it for themselves. So powerful. So I want to go back to you, and you talked about really cultivating your own inner life. And I'm curious, just share with us a little bit about what that looked like for you, because I think that's such an important piece.
You know, I think part of it was kind of giving myself permission to figure out, what does that mean? I think I had spent a lot of time creating myself in the image of what I thought I was supposed to be, or what people were expecting me to be, right? What does a good mom look like? What does a successful person look like? So, check, I need to graduate from college. Got it, check. I need to, right, fill in all the gaps of all the things. And so I think it was almost a bit of an identity crisis for me when I was able to kind of set aside all of these expectations. And like, it sounds so simple, but in some ways it was like I had to finish that developmental step of figuring out, who do I want to be? Like, if I'm not choosing who I want to be based on the responses of other people or the expectations, whether I made up that expectation or it's a very real expectation, If I'm willing to live an authentic life that resonates and feels true to me, that's separate from what someone else is expecting of me, what would that include? And how would I put things in? And part of it was definitely a bit of a wrestle, because I would journal, which I know is big in the work that you do. And it would start with a simple question: what do I like? I'm like, I don't even
Yeah.
know what I like. I liked making sure that I was meeting expectations. But that's
Yes.
very different than what is my passion, what matters to me, what do I value. And now I would say part of how that shows up is that I want to be the same person in every situation in my life.
Mm.
I want to show up with my whole self. I don't have like, you know, and of course it's like slightly different, right? Like we kind of adjust ourselves to the situation, but by and large, whether you meet me in a professional setting or socially or, wherever, I try to show up as my whole self, even if that doesn't necessarily meet expectations of the people around me. And it is a relief. It is a relief to show up that way and to give myself permission, for instance, with parenting, right? I'm giving myself permission to show up as the mother that my kids need and to build that relationship with them. And it really just doesn't matter if anyone else thinks that that's how I should be mothering, because it has nothing to do with anybody else. All it has to do is
Yeah.
with that. And so the more I lean into that, it's almost like one piece at a time has gotten put into the equation. For me, it wasn't like one big moment. It was sitting in a sea of discomfort for a while where I didn't really have an anchor because I was letting go of other people's expectations, but I really didn't know what I wanted yet. And then as I just try it, like I think what I really want to do is education, so let me try it. And then the more I teach, the more I realize I really love this. I love teaching. I love helping people to understand this work. So now I've got one more piece in my puzzle. And so part of it was like learning by trying. And I'm like a forever learner. So I'm always trying to just expose myself to new thoughts and ideas and be present in the moment and notice the things that light me up and that feel authentic to me.
Mm.
I feel like that was a really messy answer, but it was a messy process. So maybe that makes sense.
Well, and the core of what I heard is that there was a point in your life where you really stopped doing something, right? Like for me, it was that too. It was living to please the external world and measure up and check the boxes and all of that. And the decision to stop doing that is what created the space for everything that happened after that. Is that true?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That was much more concisely said, Carla. Thank you for rescuing my explanation.
I think it was clearer than you realize. So I'm curious, how does your faith play a role in that?
I would say that my faith underwent a little bit of that same process. I have always been somebody, I think one of my gifts is that I have always had a believing heart in God
Yeah.
and in believing that that's real, that there's something more than just what I can see before me. And I've always felt that connection. Not surprisingly, before this whole transition for me, I think a lot of that manifested by checking a bunch of boxes for what I thought it meant to be a woman of faith, actively participating in a church community, right? So I would kind of, even though it was coming from a genuine place in that I felt faith and a love for God and the desire for that connection, outwardly, I was really like behaving or making choices because it matched up with what I was expected to be doing as a woman of faith. Now I would say my faith is so much more grand. It incorporates so much more. I realize how much more it's enlarged. I'm trying to think of the word. It's like I realize that having faith in God's love and all of these pieces includes so much more than I thought it did. It's not limited to this specific set of like practices, that it's actually in everything, in all the things that we see. And so much like, my world relationships have evolved because of this, I think that my relationship with my own divinity and also with God have totally followed that same suit for the better. That I feel more authentically connected. I feel okay to show up as my whole raw self, all the parts of me, and I know that I am loved and accepted for that. That I am worthy of love just as I stand here today, and I didn't really trust in that before. So I would say that journey has traveled along with me into that part of who I am in my faith as well.
That's so incredible. It's so incredible. I remember like at a point in my journey where I was just so hard on myself and so doubting of myself and critical. And I remember a moment of just like this aha, that if I continued to diss myself, that I was really dissing God and God's creation and God's design. And that like that's what allowed me to really stop a lot of the craziness I was doing to myself, was just kind of like releasing all that pressure and just trusting that design, that I was created this way. And what if I just leaned into that instead of resisting all of it? And that was a pivotal moment too, but so beautiful. We could talk for a long time on that. So I also saw a quote on your website that says, miracles start to happen when you give as much energy to your dreams as you do your fears. Richard Wilkins. And so I'm curious, like, I know that's on your site for a reason, and maybe this is where we close, but what does that mean to you?
I think fear was the dragon that I had to tame in this whole process. And although I lived a good, successful life before, I wasn't happy. I wasn't seeing things unfold before me in an effortless way like I do now. I think everything felt like a fight. I was fighting for every inch of progress in my life. And a lot of that was because of fear. I had a lot of fear that I wasn't capable. I had fear that if people really knew all the parts of who I am, that they wouldn't want to love me or be connected to me. And the truth of the matter is, I never gave them the option. I never gave them the chance. So because maybe I only let them see 80% of me, within me, I knew I was only 80% loved. And that wasn't the fault of the people who were loving me. I wasn't allowing all the parts of myself to be seen and loved. And that is some serious vulnerability and working through fear in order to step into and to be able to show up as we really are. I also found that process to be true as I connected to my trauma responses. I had a lot of extensive trauma from my childhood, and I was carrying a lot of fear in my body. And I think that is what had kept me from waiting so long in my life to recognize it and address it, because I think I was really scared that if I allow myself to go there and to open myself up to all this stuff I've been trying not to connect to, it will swallow me. I won't get back out of it again. I've had to work really hard to kind of keep it contained because I had the fear that if I connect to it, then I don't know if I can get back out of it again. And so it took a spark of hope and confidence that I am capable, right? Does it come back to what we were talking about before? I knew that I had to gain some faith in myself, that I knew that I had what it takes to get through, or at least have a hope that I do. And so pushing through that fear, and instead of like dwelling on the fear, sitting in the fear, but instead being able to look for, okay, but if this did work, if I do have what it takes, what could that look like? And the more that I lean into that and give myself permission to recognize that fear doesn't really serve me, and why not hope? Why not? Why not try it? The more I do that, the more I notice miracles. I have definitely been a witness to miracles where things come together exactly as they need to, right when they need to, when I'm not living from a place of fear.
Mm, that's incredible. So for someone listening that maybe is in that place of fear of reaching out or diving into some of this stuff, because I have seen that too, what would you say to them? Like just what would you say to them? Like in that place of fearful to act or to go there, because for me, I know that like when you're willing to go there, there's treasure, right? There's treasure that awaits you. I think the more scared you are, the more treasure that awaits you. But yes, what would you say?
I mean, I guess the way for me to make it concrete, if I was sitting across from a client and they were kind of sitting in this place of fear, not sure if they wanted to move in and to like dive into this work to process their trauma, I would tell them it like both are fine choices. You can choose whatever path you want. You can choose the path of carrying this along with you, and that is work. It takes work to navigate life while you're carrying all of these extra things: fear, unprocessed trauma, beliefs, mindsets, right? But you can do it. Like a big bomb isn't going to come knock you off the earth. Like you can totally do it that way. Or you can take this path and go ahead and lean into it. And that's going to be some work too. It's going to be some emotional work and some, work as you lean into it. But coming out the other side, you're not carrying all of these burdens. And so now you can move forward and choose and pivot in your life where you want to go without having to take into account all of these other things that you have to kind of lug around with you. And another thing that I say is, I have been down this path, and so I know the way. And I have a backpack with some extra flashlights and batteries, and I'm not going to let you get lost. Like, I'm going to help you get to the other side. You're not doing this alone.
That's so awesome. And what a gift you have. And I love that question that you said, like so often we go into like, what if I fail or what if I can't? But the beautiful thing you said is what if you can?
Right. Because sometimes that's all we know. Sometimes I have to start the question of what if you are enough? What if?
Yeah.
And for some people, that's the first time they've considered that. What if I am enough? What if I do have what it takes? What if I can walk forward without any of this anymore? Is that worth it? Is that worth trying it? And only the person sitting across from me knows. I can't know that for them. Only they know that, right? And I actually believe everybody comes to this at the right time in their life too. You know what I mean? Like as much as I wish that I had done this when I was 18 years old and could have like parented my early parenting differently, I recognize that everything came together when it needed to for me to learn what I needed to and step into this work. And instead of giving my kids the gift of having like a mom without any trauma in their early years, instead I've given them the gift of seeing that no matter what you're carrying, you can transform it and move forward in whatever direction you want to in life. I gave them a template for how to heal and how to move through challenges. And maybe that's not the one I would have picked, but it's the one that they got. And I have to have confidence that that will serve them in their life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So tell people where they can find out more about you.
Okay, so the easiest place to find me personally is the website that you've referenced a couple of times, jonesharbor.com. And then if you want to learn about the education stuff that we are doing and preparing coaches and practitioners, that is integratetrauma.com. So pretty fun and easy ways to connect.
I am so honored to have had this conversation with you, and I'm so grateful that our paths have crossed, and I'm excited to see like what comes of this. But my heart is full after this conversation, and I just thank you for taking the time and being here today.
Thank you, Carla. I definitely feel that too, like kindred spirits connected and bringing light and understanding and helping people to just have some hope and confidence in themselves. And sometimes all they need is that spark to get started to take them where they need to go.
That's right. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you love listening to this podcast, may I ask you to leave a review in Apple Podcasts. These mean so much to me, and I read every one. They are a great source of fuel for me as I am creating these episodes. If you want to hear more conversations like this, hit follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help me spread the word. If this episode could impact someone you know, please share it and pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.